Part 25. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 241. No, Betty quickly refused. Shut up, I want to sleep, sleep. Seeing that reaction, Chen Tao smiled. Although, Chen Tao was indeed a little bit ready to make a move, but Betty didn't like it, so Chen Tao gave up temporarily. Holding her gently, Chen Tao also closed his eyes. The two fell asleep together. The next day, inside the Dragon Man's hall, Vilaya saw the scene in front of her through the screen. Her pupils trembled slightly and she stood up involuntarily. What's going on? Vilaya's face was full of disbelief. In the picture, countless holes were torn in the dark space. Thousands of battleships entered the universe through the opening. The number of these warships was so large that Vilya had never seen it in her life. Vilya has seen many battles of dragon civilization through the Dragon King's Academy. But there was never a time when there were more enemies than this one. Vilya suddenly frowned and said in the dragon's gene channel, all the warriors in the dragon city must gather at the dragon's palace. Yes. At the same time, Wei Lia contacted Chen Tao. Tao, a large-scale battleship group from aliens has appeared here. I think the known universe needs your protection now. Chen Tao woke up from his sleep when he heard Wei Lia's voice. He opened his eyes and looked at the girl in front of him. He said, "Got it?" Betty was looking at Chen Tao with big eyes. The two looked at each other. Chen Tao smiled and said, I have some things that I need to deal with. I may not be able to accompany you today. Betty's eyes glowed and she said, just go, I don't care. Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled. Doesn't it really matter? This arrogant little loli always likes to say sarcastic things. Perhaps Betty's words should be translated. It should be said that she didn't want Chen Tao to leave. Chen Tao said, okay, be good. Just stay here and take good care of yourself, so that you can give birth to healthy and lovely children in the future. Hearing this, Betty blushed, gave Chen Tao a hard look, and said, I don't want it, I won't give you a child, you're a pervert, a Lolita control, you're so bad. Chen Tao smiled, got out of bed and said, let's go. Go away, Betty turned sideways, with her back to Chen Tao. Chen Tao looked at Betty's slender back. He looked away and disappeared. When he appeared again, Chen Tao appeared next to Wei Lia. After taking a look, Chen Tao discovered that his position was on the high platform of the Dragon Hall. Next to him was Vilya, who was sitting on a chair, while a group of female dragons below were standing respectfully. Wei Lia looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao withdrew his gaze and sat down on the chair. He looked at Wei Lia and said, what's going on? Vilya raised her hand. A huge picture appeared above the Dragon Man Hall. Through this picture, Chen Tao's eyebrows suddenly wrinkled. Swarms of high-tech warships are flying out of the cracks in the torn universe. The warships now entering the known universe are so densely packed that there seem to be at least hundreds of millions of them. This is the first time Chen Tao has seen such a large scale in his life. Seeing this scene, Chen Tao had a different idea. The fifth universe? This is the only possibility. Wei Lia looked at Chen Tao and said, what do you think? Chen Tao said, yesterday, a person from the fifth universe who called himself Hughes went to the Earth Star and launched an attack on the Earth Star. When I caught her, she claimed that there were many people in the fifth universe who believed in St. I speculate that these are probably people from the fifth universe. Vilya frowned. We are people from the fifth universe. We came to your universe with only one purpose. Hand over Chen Tao, otherwise our battleships will destroy your universe. An indifferent voice sounded in the public genetic channel. This sound was heard by everyone present. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao frowned. Wei Lia said, you really guessed it right. She looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao slowly stood up. Seeing this, Vilya said, what are you going to do? Chen Tao looked at Wei Lia and said calmly, "Aren't they looking for me? I plan to play with them." Wei Lia shook her head, "Now is an opportunity." Opportunity, Chen Tao looked at Wei Lia. Wei Lia said, "There are many, many small universes in this big universe, and among these small universes, they ranked the 10 strongest universes, but our universe was not in the ranking. It can be seen that our universe has great influence on the world. To them, it's just an unpopular little universe. Just because we are not in the mainstream, these things happen. If we don't show our strength, others will think that we are weak and can be bullied," Wei Lia said. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "You are powerful enough. Everyone else in the universe knows how powerful you are, but if the entire universe is not powerful, they still won't take us seriously. I've been waiting for an opportunity to show off the power of our universe, and now is that opportunity." Chen Tao thought for a moment, nodded slightly, and sat back slowly. What Wei Lia said did make sense, but Chen Tao did not intend to cause any harm to the moving female dragons in front of him. Although these female dragons are wearing the super concept armor given by Chen Tao. But the other party is from the 5th universe, and it is inevitable that there will be people with astronomical computers in it. If an accident like the Dragon Man Zhou happens again, Chen Tao can't stand it. This problem needs to be solved. At the same time, Valia stood up and looked at the female dragons below. Now there are hundreds of millions of enemies invading our universe. They threaten to flatten our universe and destroy our firm belief until now. As dragons, as warriors of dragon civilization, what should we do about this matter? Her voice is powerful, not inferior to that of men. Fight. Suddenly, a deafening voice rang out in the dragon hall. Valia said, "Yes. It's a fight? You have super concept armor and cutting-edge weapons given by our King Chen Tao, but this does not mean that you are invincible. There are still weapons on the other side that can take your lives. Are you afraid?" "No. For the balance of the universe, it is our honor to fall into our lives." The voice was very loud, without any hesitation. Seeing this, Chen Tao was slightly startled. Valia did not think about the death of the warriors, and her main purpose was not to protect the lives of the warriors. Her main purpose was to win the war and establish the prestige of her universe in front of other small universes. War is bloody. This is something that the king should have realized long ago. Chen Tao realized that Valia was the real king and the real leader. He and Chen Tao were thinking about different things. Valia said, "Open the giant wormhole." A huge dark wormhole appeared in the dragon hall. Valia drew the long sword at his waist and pointed directly at the wormhole. "Dragon warriors, set off. My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 242. Valia spread her wings and was the first to fly directly into the wormhole. When the other dragon warriors saw it, they also spread their dragon wings and flew into the wormhole. For a time, the tens of thousands of dragon warriors were like stars, sinking into the wormhole and arriving at the battlefield. Seeing this scene, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. Time stops passing. Everything around Chen Tao turned into blue code, and everything was suspended. Chen Tao looked at the dragon warriors who turned into blue codes. Chen Tao withdrew his gaze and disappeared from the spot. When he appeared again, he came to the battlefield. The enemy warships on the other side of the battlefield also turned into blue codes. Next to Chen Tao was Wei Lia. Like the others, Wei Lia also turned into blue codes. She spread her dragon wings and looked straight ahead. An offensive stance. Valia is really planning to go to war with Universe 5. Chen Tao looked at Wei Lia beside him, then looked away and looked at the battleships in front that turned into blue codes. Chen Tao said, "I am indeed not a qualified leader. I care more about the lives of the people around me than victory. For Valia, this war is an unavoidable war. Although some dragon warriors are likely to die in this war, as long as Villia's goal of establishing power in this universe is achieved, everything will be fine. All worth it? Because that affects the overall situation. But as for Chen Tao would rather not establish his authority, and he does not want these dragon girls to get hurt in any way. In the past, Chen Tao could ignore them, but now they call Chen Tao king. Then their lives are extremely precious to Chen Tao. No matter who they are, Chen Tao will not allow them to get injured or die, which is even more unacceptable to Chen Tao. Chen Tao's idea is obviously not what a leader should have. It is too benevolent. But no matter what, Chen Tao must carry out this kindness. He also believes that he is not suitable to be a leader, and he does not intend to abandon this kindness. For Chen Tao to watch the death of those female dragons was something he could not accept. These female dragons are all wearing super concept armor at the moment. As long as they don't encounter technology owners with large computers, then they will not get into trouble. In other words, as long as all the people with large computers in this group of battleships are removed, nothing will happen to them. Realize this. Chen Tao said, Xingyun, do a search to find the person among the enemies who analyzed the super conceptual armor. Received instructions, searching. The search is complete. A total of 576,518,761 enemies have been scanned. There are a total of 12 people with analytical super concept armor. 12. In other words, among the more than 500 million people in front of us, 12 people have celestial computers. It is indeed a ranked universe. You must know that in Chen Tao's world, without Chen Tao's participation, there are only 4 celestial computers in this world. But the other party has 12. The difference is obvious. But, so what? Chen Tao said, report to me the locations of the 12 people. Okay. At this time, Chen Tao got some information. Based on this information, Chen Tao found the locations of these 12 people. Directly erase the codes of these 12 people. After getting it done, Chen Tao's figure returned to the Dragon Man's hall. Time resumes its passage. The female dragons in front of me are still flying into the wormhole one after another. Chen Tao raised his face and looked at the screen. Villia and the female dragons have already rushed into the battleship of the 5th universe and started to massacre. The 500 million enemies of the 5th universe are like a bunch of scum in front of Villia and others. The technological weapons from the 5th universe were bombarding Villia and others like crazy. The white and silver armor on Villia's body lit up, blocking all attacks. Although there are currently only more than 50,000 female dragons who can participate in the battle in Dragon City, each of them has super concept armor and cutting-edge weapons with thunder engines. Heavily armed, they were like sharp blades, tearing apart the 500 million enemy troops. There were no screams or feelings of fear. After all, sound could not be transmitted in space, and those enemies would not scream in the public genetic channel, so no sound could be heard. But you can see that the battleships were struck by lightning and exploded, and the enemies were reduced to coke by lightning. Those images fit together. This is massacre, this is one-sided massacre. Seeing this, Chen Tao felt relieved. After Chen Tao wiped out the 12 enemies with celestial computers, there was no longer any suspense in this war. Chen Tao didn't look any further. He opened the miniature wormhole, stepped into the wormhole, and disappeared into the Dragon Man's hall. This one-sided war lasted for 5 hours. Those enemies collapsed. From the beginning, the battleship was still able to attack, but now it is running away like crazy. Villia looked at the escaping warships that sank into the opening of the rift in the universe, and Villia's eyebrows stretched. We won, Dragon Man Chiao suddenly shouted. Yeah. Haha, the civilization in the alien universe only has a lot of people, so it's not that good. Well, it seems like their attacks can't break through the super concept armor the king gave us. Wang is really strong. Hearing the conversation between the sisters in the Gene channel, Valia frowned slightly, and she said, "Report casualties." "Sister Valia, there are no casualties," Dragon Manchiao reported. Hearing this, Valia frowned suddenly. "Impossible. Impossible, there are no casualties." Valia seemed to realize something, and her eyebrows stretched slightly. "Chen Tao, how long do you plan to protect them?" Valia's eyebrows stretched slightly, and she didn't say anything, saying, "Let's go." Those female dragon warriors thought that the enemy was too weak, but only Valia knew that it was not that the enemy was weak, but that they were protected by a stronger person. The process, although different from what Valia imagined, but the result is still useful. This battle is enough to make the dragon civilization famous in this universe. At the same time, on the other side, Chen Tao was lying on the bed, looking at the ceiling. "The war is over, and the dragon civilization has 0 casualties," Nebula's mechanical voice came. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao smiled. Just as he guessed. "What are you doing?" a voice came from the side. Chen Tao came back to his senses. He turned his head and saw a pair of big ruby eyes. She was looking at Chen Tao, with a hint of light in her eyes. "This girl is Betty." Betty just woke up, her expression was a little lazy. Chen Tao smiled, raised his hand, fell on her cheek, and gently stroked her cheek. Betty's face was slightly red, and she didn't avoid it, her eyes looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao gently stroked her cheek and slowly moved closer to her face. "You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 243. She blushed and turned her face away. Seeing Betty's reaction, Chen Tao was slightly startled. He smiled and said, "Aren't you going to kiss me?" Betty said, "No kiss, unless you tell me, what did you do just now?" Upon hearing this, Chen Tao smiled, "You care so much." Betty looked at the ceiling and said, "I don't care, I just asked casually." "Forget it if you don't tell me, huh, I don't care." She turned around and turned her back to Chen Tao. She turned her back to Chen Tao. Betty was wearing that thin white shirt, which clung to her petite figure and looked quite cute. Chen Tao smiled, came closer, hugged her gently, held her shoulders, and said with a soft smile, "I went to the dragon civilization to deal with something, it's not that important. I just finished dealing with it and came back. I saw you were still sleeping, so I didn't bother you." Betty's eyes glowed with luster. She turned over, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "That's pretty much it?" She closed her eyes and raised her little face slightly. Her cheeks were slightly red and her mouth was slightly open, as if she was giving Chen Tao a reward. Chen Tao smiled. He leaned closer and gave her a symbolic kiss. Betty was slightly startled. She slowly opened her eyes, looked at Chen Tao, pursed her thin lips, and said, "I want to eat steak." Hearing this, Chen Tao couldn't help but smile. "It's not noon yet." Well, Betty puffed her cheeks and said, "I want to eat it." Chen Tao scratched the bridge of her nose with his hand and said with a smile, "Okay, let's make a deal." Betty was slightly startled. "What deal?" He leaned close to Betty's ear and whispered softly. Betty's face suddenly turned red. She clenched her little hands into pink fists and beat Chen Tao's chest, saying, "Lolakan, you big pervert, don't even think about it." Her face turned red and she couldn't help but hide her face in Chen Tao's arms. "No, I don't want that." Betty shook her head. She turned down a million rejections. Seeing Betty's reaction, Chen Tao smiled, "Then there's nothing we can do. Let's wait until noon to eat." Betty pursed her thin lips, her eyes glowing with luster. "I want to eat," Betty said softly. Chen Tao looked at Betty and said with a smile, "Then that's all we can do." Betty blushed and said, "No." She glared at Chen Tao and said, "I won't even die." Chen Tao smiled. He didn't say anything, he just hugged Betty tightly into his arms, caressed her back gently, comforted her gently, and stayed with her tenderly. Betty closed her eyes. "Master, I just detected that there is a stream of stellar energy shooting towards the Earth star at the speed of light. It is estimated that it will hit the Earth star in 1 minute. That energy can instantly tear the Earth star apart, causing explosion." Nebula's voice came. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao frowned slightly. Stellar energy? Someone launched an attack on Earth star? Obviously, it's the guy from the fifth universe again. Didn't all those people evacuate? Chen Tao had doubts in his mind, but that was not the focus now. He had to wait and act quickly to isolate the star's energy. Think of this. "Are you angry?" a voice suddenly came from beside him. Chen Tao came back to his senses and looked at Betty beside him. Betty's little face turned red. She looked at Chen Tao. "If you really want to, I can give it a try." Upon hearing this, Chen Tao smiled. He kissed her forehead and said, "Okay, I'm kidding you. How could I let you do that kind of thing? I have something to do soon and need to leave again. You stay here for a while, I will give you steak to eat later." Betty's eyes lit up slightly and she said, "Yeah, okay." So cute. Chen Tao got out of bed, put on his clothes, and disappeared from the spot. When Chen Tao appeared again, he appeared in the sky of the Earth star. He did not look for the star energy. Because the star's energy currently travels at the speed of light, it is impossible to get close enough to capture it with the naked eye. Chen Tao said, "The nebula captures the data of the star's energy." Capturing. Capture successful, data screen generated. There was a blue screen in front of Chen Tao, and a group of green data could be seen in the screen. Through this data, Chen Tao can find the current location and upcoming path of the star's energy. Find the place where it will pass in 10 seconds. Time stops passing. Chen Tao stepped into the inner world and came to the place where the stellar energy was about to pass. He began to write, and on this empty path, he wrote a giant shield immune to the energy of the star. Time resumes its passage. Chen Tao looked forward. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. Suddenly, Chen Tao saw a light shining in the distance. 2, 1. Chen Tao felt a red light in front of his eyes, and the protective shield suddenly lit up with white light. After that, the light dissipated. Nailed it? Although not much can be seen with the naked eye, the energy that just hit was the star energy. The attack power of the star energy is extremely powerful. If it hits the Earth star will explode directly. But in the face of a superconceptual shield that is immune to stellar energy supply, this stellar energy is naturally of little use. After intercepting the star energy, Chen Tao was about to find the mastermind when a voice suddenly sounded in his head. "Master, the heat of the stars in your galaxy is extinguishing." Nebula's mechanical voice came. After hearing this voice, Chen Tao's face changed slightly, and his eyebrows frowned suddenly. Asshole. Chen Tao stepped directly into the inner world. Pause time. Chen Tao realized that the people in the fifth universe were going to retaliate against Chen Tao in various ways. Their main purpose now was indeed to destroy the Earth star like USI. In their view, the mother star was very important. Destroying the Earth star was equivalent to destroying the mother star, and at the same time, they could also kill Chen Tao's relatives who lived on the Earth star. First, use the energy of the stars for long-range attacks, and then attack the sun. If these people continue to threaten the Earth star in various ways, Chen Tao will have to run around. They will always succeed. In this case, Chen Tao plans to suspend the time of this world directly, and solve all the problems in this world. Chen Tao said, "Nebula, Locate the source of stellar energy. Received the command, searching. Search completed, locating. Location completed. Nebula directly put the location information into Chen Tao's database. After receiving this information, Chen Tao disappeared. Reappeared. Chen Tao's figure is now in the dark space. Over there is a huge battleship. The warship head has been changed into a weapon, like a giant gun muzzle. The muzzle is pointed at the direction of the Earth. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 244. This is the weapon that just launched stellar energy to bombard the Earth. Chen Tao glanced at it and waved his hand. He directly wiped out the warship. Of course, in addition to the warship, the people inside the warship were also wiped out. After finishing, he looked at the empty space. There was no second warship in the space. Just one? Chen Tao didn't think much about it. His figure disappeared again and appeared above the solar system. In Chen Tao's vision, the entire solar system is now blue code. When Chen Tao's eyes fell on the sun, he saw the blue code that was different from usual, and his eyebrows frowned slightly. The code of the sun has obviously been rewritten. According to the current code, the reaction in the sun will stop quickly and the heat will disappear. If the heat of the sun disappears, it will no longer be a star, and without the heat of the sun, the Earth will usher in the end. However, for Chen Tao, modifying the code of the star is not a difficult task. Chen Tao rewrote the code of the sun under Chen Tao's operation. Some blue codes that should not exist were erased, and then new blue codes were re-entered. It took Chen Tao half an hour to repair the sun. After it was done, Chen Tao's sight fell in one direction. During the writing process just now, Chen Tao paid attention to the surroundings, and he found a figure not far from the solar system. Chen Tao's figure disappeared, and when he appeared again, he appeared in the position of the figure. He looked at the man in front of him. He was made up of blue codes all over his body. Through his appearance, Chen Tao could tell that this was a man. However, he couldn't tell what he looked like. At this time, the man entered the surface world from the inner world mode. He exited the blue code mode, and changed back to his original appearance. As soon as he changed back to his original appearance, Chen Tao saw it clearly. This man has white hair and white eyes, and is somewhat similar to Ster. Obviously, he is from the fifth universe again. After seeing the man's appearance, Chen Tao was sure that he was not wrong. It turned out to be a person from the fifth universe. As soon as the man saw Chen Tao, his pupils condensed slightly. Chen Tao. He recognized Chen Tao. Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly and said, "Do you recognize me?" The man's face sank, and he raised his hand, as if he wanted to do something. Suddenly, the man seemed to realize something and his face changed drastically. Looking at the man's actions, Chen Tao crossed his arms and said, "You are now in my inner world. In my inner world, I am a god. I can make any rules I want. You can't attack me." The man's eyebrows frowned suddenly. He stared at Chen Tao and said, "You killed God Stir, this matter will not be let go. You killed me, but no one else in the fifth universe will let you go." Hearing this, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly, and he said lightly, "Okay, let's see who won't let who go. I didn't want to cause trouble for you, but now you are like flies, which is annoying. I think it's time for me to go to your fifth universe and take a look." Speaking of this, Chen Tao paused for a moment, as if thinking about something. He looked at the man and said, "The gene function of the sixth generation genome can create a new universe, but I don't know yet whether I can destroy a universe. What do you think will happen if I use your fifth universe to do experiments?" The man's face changed slightly. "Destroy the universe, this is impossible." Realizing the horror of this matter, the man's face turned pale, and there was a trace of fear and uneasiness in his pupils. Chen Tao said lightly, "It is possible only after trying it. Of course, As for the result, I think you can't see it? As he said, the man was startled. What do you mean? Suddenly, the man seemed to realize something. He looked down and found that his body was disappearing out of thin air at a speed visible to the naked eye. The man's pupils trembled slightly. You. Before the man said the last word, his body had completely disappeared. His data was directly erased by Chen Tao. According to common sense, after reaching the third generation of the genome, it is immortal. Even if the genome can be destroyed with sharp silver, the genome's self-recovery ability will restore it to normal. However, Chen Tao's technology has long surpassed that level. He can completely erase the other party's data. In this way, it will be true death. Chen Tao did not let time resume. He said to Xingyun, I need to write a defense system for the solar system so that it can have its own defense ability. Can you do it? Received the instruction, do you want to use the strongest celestial defense system in the database? Xingyun's mechanical voice came. Chen Tao said, the strongest, how long will it take? Xingyun said, it is expected to take 1,000 Earth years. Chen Tao touched the back of his head and said, no, the defense system I need is only as long as they can withstand the technological destruction of the alien universe. How long does it take to make such a celestial defense system? Xingyun said, calculation completed, the time required is 1 Earth year. 1 year, too long. But it is natural that it takes so long for a celestial system as huge as the entire solar system to have the technological capability to resist invasion from the alien universe. And 1 year is certainly much less than 1,000 years. Realizing this, Chen Tao nodded slightly and said, okay, start writing. Although it takes a lot of time to do this, it will be done once and for all. It can completely eradicate the threat of the fifth universe. After all, the solar system is too fragile for those enemies from the outer universe, and they can be killed at will. A celestial defense system is necessary. Received the order, start writing. Nebula's mechanical voice came. Chen Tao could see blue codes appearing on the periphery of the solar system, and those codes were being generated rapidly, very fast. But even faster, the solar system is still very large. 1 year. Chen Tao shook his head and asked him to continue waiting in this space. He didn't think he could stand it. However, Chen Tao thought of a way to relieve the boredom. He asked Nebula to continue writing, and he returned to the Earth. Back to the bedroom in Yuehu Manor. To be precise, it was Betty's bedroom. The whole bedroom looked like blue codes. He could recognize what the items were by looking at their shapes. However, Chen Tao found that he couldn't find Betty. Chen Tao looked around and paused. He noticed a small humanoid code on the balcony. Seeing this, Chen Tao smiled. It should be her. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 245. Chen Tao walked over. He found Betty standing on the balcony surrounded by a security net, lying on the balcony, looking at the world outside. This is how Chen Tao spends this boring year. Betty. Find her to kill time with. After all, Chen Tao can enter the inner world mode at will and transfer some people or objects to the outer world. In this case, why not find someone to spend this boring time with you? Thinking of this, Chen Tao thought, and the blue code on Betty began to disappear, gradually changing back to its original appearance. Betty blinked and looked at the blue code in front of her. She was slightly startled, and then looked at Chen Tao beside her. What are you doing suddenly? Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled and said, this is my inner world. I am writing a program now, which will take a while. If you have nothing to do, I will bring you in and let you accompany me. Ah, Betty was startled. She crossed her arms across her chest, puffed her face, looked at Chen Tao, and said, I know, you treat me as a tool to kill time. Humph. She pursed her lips and looked unhappy. Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled and his eyes fell on Betty. Betty must have just gotten up, and she was wearing a thin shirt that clung to her petite and cute figure. Although she is petite, her proportions are very good. Once her waist is grasped, her legs are slender and straight. Her skin is very white as gelatin. That face was flawlessly beautiful, and her ruby eyes and hair made her even more glamorous. Looks very comfortable. Betty turned slightly sideways, looked at the blue coat next to her, and said, "Why don't you ask Katie to accompany you? Isn't she better? The former king of dragons, powerful and smart." Upon hearing this, Chen Tao blinked, smiled, and said, "It's so sour. Whose jealousy jar has been overturned?" Betty was startled, her little face flushed and turned red. She glared at Chen Tao fiercely and said, "Nonsense, I'm not jealous." Chen Tao was delighted and stretched out his hand. Don't hug me," Betty yelled. Chen Tao held her waist with his big hands and easily held her in his arms. She was petite, sitting in Chen Tao's arms, with her little head at the same level as Chen Tao's face. Betty struggled, "Put me down. I'm not a child. Don't hug me all the time." Her face turned red. Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled and said, "Don't let go." He made a chair, he sat in it and put Betty in his arms. Betty sat down, looked at Chen Tao, and noticed Chen Tao's gentle eyes. She stopped struggling, and just slowly leaned her little head on Chen Tao's chest, seeming a little submissive. She said, "You haven't answered me yet, why don't you call me Katie?" Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled, "What do you think?" Betty raised her face, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "Am I better than Katie?" Chen Tao pondered for a moment, looked at Betty, and said, "If you are willing to let me touch you, I think you can do better than Katie." Betty blushed, rolled her eyes at Chen Tao, and said, "I don't want it. I want to flatter you, you bad guy. You said Katie is better than me, then just call Katie. I don't want to accompany you through such a boring life." Betty puffed her face, she was a little angry. This man actually said that Katie was better than her. Betty wanted to get down, but Chen Tao held her in his arms, preventing her from getting down. Feeling this, Betty bit her lower lip, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "Let me go, I want to go down." Chen Tao looked at Betty. He had a smile on his face. He hugged Betty gently and slowly approached her face. Betty blushed and turned away from Chen Tao. "What are you doing? If you want to kiss, kiss Katie, don't kiss me." She was terribly jealous. Chen Tao raised his hand and hugged Betty. Betty was startled and looked at Chen Tao. The bed returned to its original appearance. Chen Tao put Betty on the bed, and Betty slowly lay down. She looked at Chen Tao with her big ruby eyes. Chen Tao's face was very close to hers, less than 2 centimeters. Eyes facing each other. Chen Tao looked into her eyes, raised his hand, landed on her cheek, picked up her hair, and put it behind her ears. He said softly, "It takes a year to write that program. In this year, I want you to be pregnant with my child." Upon hearing this, Betty's face turned red, and she shook her head as a rejection. But there was a hint of confusion in those ruby-like eyes. Chen Tao lowered his face. Betty quickly said, "Lilican, no." He kissed her. Betty's eyelashes trembled slightly and she slowly closed her eyes. Time passes quickly. A day and a night passed by in a blink of an eye. On this day, Chen Tao looked at the ceiling made of blue codes. Suddenly, there was movement around him. Chen Tao turned his face and saw that Betty did not open her eyes, but just leaned her body towards Chen Tao. Sensing her actions, Chen Tao smiled, turned sideways, and gently stroked her hair with his big hands, landing on her back to comfort her. "Lilican," Betty cursed lightly. Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled, "Well, I am a Lilican." Humph. Betty snorted slightly, looking a little unhappy, and said, "Are you satisfied now? This man is a bastard. He doesn't respect her ideas at all and even ignores her words." She said she couldn't do it anymore, but he only cared about himself. Betty didn't know what she was feeling. Although she knew that her heart was already on him, she was not mentally prepared to give her body to him. But Chen Tao wanted her just like that. The biggest problem was that Betty found that she didn't hate him at all, but liked him more. Realizing her mental preparation, Betty's mind was in chaos. Sure enough, as a strong woman who specializes in science and technology military, she really knows nothing about feelings. Chen Tao said in her ear, "Of course I'm not satisfied. I want more." Betty raised her little hand and beat Chen Tao's chest. "Pervert, Lolita control." Chen Tao laughed. "Lolita control?" Indeed, Betty's body shape is really a Lolita, but in fact she is the Red Dragon King, who has lived for millions of years. Is she a Lolita? This shouldn't count. Therefore, Chen Tao did not feel guilty at all. On the contrary, he enjoyed it. Chen Tao smelled the unique fragrance on Betty's body and said softly, "Do you think I can make you pregnant in a year?" "No," Betty hid her little head in Chen Tao's arms, "I don't want a child." Chen Tao was startled, and he looked at Betty. "You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 246. Betty closed her eyes and said, "Although I am from the Red Dragon clan, I can also be regarded as a dragon. We dragons all have the same culture. When a female dragon gives her body and mind to a man, then that man it's everything to her. I gave you everything, and now you are everything to me. I can give you anything, but forget about the children. I don't want to have children." Chen Tao looked at Betty's blushing face and said with a smile, "Why? It's kind of interesting. Katie has always wanted children, especially male ones, to balance the genders in Dragon City. And Betty doesn't want it, which is really interesting." Betty said, "I still like a person who is free and independent. I am different from Katie. I like freedom." "Well." Chen Tao pondered for a moment, then said with a smile, "No wonder you were expelled by Kati. In the dragon civilization, all dragons are bound by the belief in the balance of the universe, but Betty wants to be free. It is no wonder that such a difference in thinking will lead to the following situation." Upon hearing this, Betty frowned, raised her face and looked at Chen Tao, bulging her face and looking angry. "What's the matter? I like freedom, what does it have to do with being deported?" Seeing that Betty was angry, Chen Tao quickly laughed and said, "I also like freedom. Okay, I have no other intentions, don't be angry. It's not good for your health if you are angry." Betty rolled her eyes at Chen Tao, looked away, and leaned her head on Chen Tao's arms. Chen Tao looked at Betty's reaction. He revealed Xiangrong and slowly stroked her back with his hand. Betty's eyes glowed with a hint of luster, and she slowly closed her eyes. Betty seemed to remember something. She smiled, raised her face, looked into Chen Tao's eyes, and said, "You said before that if I let you touch me, I will be better than Katie. Am I better than Katie now?" Chen Tao was slightly startled. Does she care so much? No wonder. Betty was expelled by Katie. After that, Betty spent millions of years doing scientific and technological research in order to surpass Katie. It is estimated that Betty and Katie have been competing for so many years. Of course, Katie didn't care about her at all. This was a wishful competition. After so many years of competition, Betty is eager to be better than Katie. She is losing the current technological competition. So Betty wants to find something better than Katie from another aspect, such as Chen Tao. Seeing Betty's expectant expression, Chen Tao thought for a moment and said, well, I need to make sure again. If I can do it again, I think I can be sure. Betty was startled. She bit her lower lip and rolled her eyes at Chen Tao. Bad villain, humph, I'll ignore you. She turned around, with her back facing Chen Tao. She was a little angry. Seeing Betty's reaction, Chen Tao smiled. He approached Betty, hugged her, and chuckled, I'm sorry, you are so beautiful, I can't help it. This sentence was very helpful to Betty, and her stern face gradually relaxed a little. Chen Tao said softly in Betty's ear, I think Betty is better than Katie. For Chen Tao, Katie is as good as Katie, and Betty is as good as Betty. There is no comparison between the two, but now that he wants to coax Betty, of course he can make Betty feel better. Betty's eyes lit up. She said, then, where can I go? Chen Tao said, Betty is small and feels very comfortable when held in my arms. Her small arms and legs are very cute. She is also well behaved and obedient. Betty's eyes glowed with a hint of luster and she said, huh, what a lolicon comment. If Katie wants, Katie can become smaller with the current technology, as long as the body is willing, the body can use the celestial computer to reprogram itself. Whether you want to become a royal sister or a Lolita, you can do it according to your own wishes. Betty can actually change back to her royal sister, of course, provided she can communicate with the celestial computer behind her. Betty was not so satisfied with Chen Tao's answer. Chen Tao smiled and said, unfortunately, it is Betty who has a small body now, but Katie is different. So, in my opinion, Betty is better than Katie now. Betty pursed her thin lips slightly, her eyes glowing with a hint of luster, and said, huh, although it is a comment from a lolicon, what you said does make sense. Regardless of whether Katie can become smaller, she is becoming smaller now. Mine. And if you think I'm cuter now, then I win. After thinking about it, Betty couldn't help but smile. Look at Betty's smile. Chen Tao also laughed. Betty stretched her eyebrows slightly, turned around slightly, snuggled her little body into Chen Tao's arms, and said, I forgive you for what happened just now. What just happened? Chen Tao smiled, said nothing, and gently touched her back. Betty slowly closed her eyes. By the way, you haven't told me what program you are writing, Betty said softly. Hearing this, Chen Tao said, the galaxy we are in is the solar system. It has been invaded by enemies from outside recently, so I wrote a security system for the solar system to protect it. Betty hummed, she frowned, opened her eyes, looked at Chen Tao with her ruby-like eyes, and said, you program a security system for a galaxy, and it only takes 1 year. There was a hint of disbelief in her expression. Chen Tao looked at Betty and said with a smile, yeah. That is a galaxy, Betty said, it takes 1 year to program a security system the size of a galaxy. Even if I use my celestial computer to program it, I estimate that the security system created will not even take a hammer. It's impossible to stop it, let alone resist any high-tech invasion. Chen Tao was slightly startled, is this so? However, thinking about it in retrospect, it is indeed a bit exaggerated to complete a galaxy's celestial defense project in 1 year. Chen Tao smiled and said, I think it should be no problem to resist the black hole. Black holes are the attack method of the 5th generation universe. They use ultrasonic waves to create black holes for attack. Chen Tao's instruction to Nebula was to have Nebula write a celestial defense system that could withstand attacks from outer space civilizations. In this case, of course, it means that the system can withstand the attack of the black hole. Betty's ruby-like eyes were trembling slightly. What kind of performance is the computer behind you? Is it so terrifying? Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled and said, that is your man's celestial computer, of course it must be terrifying. Upon hearing this, Betty's face turned slightly red. But it's unlikely, it's incredible. As far as I know, the celestial defense system of Dragon Man City cannot withstand black holes, and the celestial defense system of Dragon Man City is limited by the celestial computers of Kadi and Bayao. A super powerful defense system that took 3,000 years to compile. Betty looked at Chen Tao. Where did your computer come from? That's too exaggerated. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 247. Betty was very interested in the celestial computer behind Chen Tao. It was too powerful. A galaxy defense system that can withstand black hole attacks can be programmed in 1 year. For Betty, this is too exaggerated. She was very interested, so Betty wanted to know what it was. Chen Tao looked at Betty and said, "Actually, I don't know the origin of my computer. I used to be just an ordinary person, but then I almost died in an accident, so I activated it." Betty's eyebrows slightly stretched and she said, "So, it has been connected to you from the beginning, but it was not activated before. If you don't know, that means that the celestial computer is operating without your knowledge. Connected with you. That's weird." Betty frowned cutely and said, "There shouldn't be such a powerful celestial computer in the known universe." "Well, not only does it not exist in our universe, but it does not exist in the outer universe either." Chen Tao looked at Betty. After Chen Tao's judgment during this period, he was absolutely sure that even in the large universe outside this small universe, there was no existence that could create a high-tech celestial computer like Nebula. Otherwise, the outer universe cannot be just a fifth-generation gene body. Betty was slightly startled, her eyes glowing with luster, and she looked at Chen Tao with her big eyes. "There is nothing in the outer universe, so where did it come from?" Chen Tao said, "I think it should be from the future." "Future?" Betty's eyes froze slightly, and her eyes trembled slightly. "You mean, people from the future brought that celestial computer to you through time and space, and then gave this celestial computer to you? Why is that?" Betty's face was full of doubts. Hearing this, Chen Tao could only smile bitterly. "I also want to know the answer." Betty's eyes glowed with a hint of luster. She gently pursed her lower lip and said, "Maybe I want you to save this universe." Chen Tao said, "Maybe, actually, I don't know, and I can't be sure what this is all about." "Well." Betty's eyes glowed, and she said, "Forget it, I don't want to think about it anymore. Since the good things are delivered to your door for free, just keep them." "Then, I have another question. Why do you suddenly want to build such a galaxy security system?" Betty looked at Chen Tao with her ruby eyes and said, "Is there someone who wants to attack the solar system?" Chen Tao said, "There is indeed someone, a person from the fifth universe. You have seen that ste after that." Betty frowned her slender eyebrows slightly. "Did that guy's people come to take revenge on you?" "Yeah." Betty was quite smart. Chen Tao said, "They don't plan to fight me head-on. Instead, they choose to attack the Earth star, or attack the solar system to indirectly destroy the Earth star. Well, after all, with the high technology you currently have," Betty said, "their god of the universe is no longer good. If they want to be positive, it will definitely be thankless. But destroying the mother planet can attack you mentally. Their retaliation methods are small, but the effect is very obvious." Betty said, "If it were me, I would do the same thing." When Chen Tao heard this, he looked at Betty and smiled helplessly. "So?" Betty looked at Chen Tao and said, "This is why you plan to build this galaxy defense system, and then what?" "Then," Chen Tao looked at Betty. Betty said, "People are beating you up. Don't you want to do something? Are you going to stay at home and get beaten?" She looked at Chen Tao with her ruby-like eyes. Chen Tao couldn't help but smile and said, "It seems I can't hide anything from you. Indeed, I plan to go to their house." Betty pursed her thin lips and said, "I want to go." She was very direct and spoke her inner thoughts without any hesitation. Chen Tao looked at Betty and said with a smile, "Is that so?" But it's been a long time now. If you follow me, I guess I won't be able to hold it back because of your cuteness. Don't be afraid, when you come back, your belly will grow bigger. Betty's face turned red, she rolled her eyes at Chen Tao, and said, I don't care, I'm going anyway. Also, you are so powerful, you must have a way to make me reconnect to my celestial computer. Please help me quickly get this done. Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled, okay. Betty's eyes lit up slightly. She could feel that she was connected to the computer, and at the same time, the gene function in her body was restored. She looked at Chen Tao, what did you do? Chen Tao looked at Betty and said with a smile, I have lifted the restrictions on your genetic functions. Betty's eyes narrowed slightly. For a moment, Betty was stunned. She always thought that when she was escaping, her body was struck by lightning, which caused an error in the calculation of the micro-wormhole, which caused her to be unable to use her genetic functions. However, she never expected that it turned out to be this man from a very early age. Her genetic functions were disabled from the beginning. This bastard. Betty was very angry. She picked up Chen Tao's hand and bit Chen Tao's palm. Ah! It hurts, you're going to bite my flesh off. Ah! Chen Tao screamed in cooperation. Only Betty could think of biting Chen Tao, who had 6 generations of genes, with his teeth. In order to cooperate with Betty, Chen Tao could only use his acting talent. Betty was startled. She let go of Chen Tao's hand, glared at Chen Tao, and said, pretend as if it's really happening, and I didn't even bite you. Although she didn't bite, Betty couldn't help but feel happy when she saw Chen Tao's cooperation. However, Betty was still angry, so she couldn't laugh. Chen Tao retracted his hand and said, nothing moved. I feel like it's almost killing me. Betty rolled her eyes at Chen Tao, humph. Don't think I will forgive you for this, you are such a bastard. She turned around and turned her back to Chen Tao. It restricted my gene function and imprisoned me, Betty snorted. The more I thought about Betty, the more I felt this man was going too far. Thinking about the things this man did, Betty felt a little baffled. He's obviously a bastard, a Lolita control, and a pervert. How could I fall in love with such a man and give him my body and soul? It's really baffling, Betty muttered. Chen Tao heard it, and he slowly put Betty into his arms. Betty bit her lower lip and struggled symbolically, let me go, don't touch me, you are a bad thing. Chen Tao kissed her baby face and said with a smile, if it wasn't so bad, how could I make you fall in love? Betty was confused, her eyes glowed, and she slowly closed her eyes. Lolicon, pervert. After hearing Betty's words, Chen Tao leaned close to Betty's ear and whispered softly, I promise you, I will take you with me when I go to the 5th universe. Being held in Chen Tao's arms, he listened to the man's whisper in his ear. Betty could feel the man's broad embrace behind her, and she could also feel her own petiteness and fragility. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 248. Betty has always been the high and mighty Red Dragon King. In her territory, she is the most powerful one, and no one is qualified to be on equal footing with her. And now Betty suddenly found that she was so petite and weak, and she also needed protection. In any case, even if the man behind her was a Lolita control and a pervert, Betty had already chosen him. This was already a final conclusion, and she could not change it. Betty had no choice, she did not speak, just stayed quietly in his arms. At this moment, Betty had another idea. Since she turned into a Lolita body, she has been thinking that after connecting with her celestial computer, she will immediately change her body back to the previous state. But now Betty is very hesitant, should she change back? Feeling the body temperature of the man next to her, Betty subconsciously turned her face slightly and looked at Chen Tao next to her. Chen Tao was leaning behind her with his eyes closed. Looking at this man, Betty pursed her lips and she slowly closed her eyes. Thinking to herself, forget it, let it be. Anyway, even with this body shape, it will not affect my fighting ability. Is it for this man? I'm not for him, I'm just too lazy to change back, Betty said to herself. She slowly closed her eyes, she was a little tired. Logically, she wouldn't be tired, but every time he held her, she would feel tired and want to sleep. I guess it's because the environment is too good. In this way, day after day passed. A year is very long, and it slowly passed in the jokes between Chen Tao and Betty. Betty is very arrogant, but Chen Tao doesn't care, always taking care of himself. Betty can't do anything about Chen Tao. A year has passed. Compilation is completed. A voice sounded in his sleep. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao opened his eyes. He looked at Betty beside him. Betty was facing away from Chen Tao, and she was still sleeping. Seeing this, Chen Tao smiled, moved closer, and kissed her cheek. Betty frowned cutely, her eyelashes moved, and she slowly opened her eyes. Feeling Chen Tao, she turned her face slightly and looked at Chen Tao. Their eyes met. Chen Tao smiled, "Baby, are you awake?" Betty rolled her eyes at Chen Tao, "Big bad guy, just know how to bully people," she puffed up her little face. This bastard never stopped bullying her. He was simply a big bad guy. Chen Tao looked at Betty, raised his big hand, held Betty's small hand, looked at her small hand, and said with a smile, "Look at your hand, it's so small." He opened his hand and held her small palm. Her palm was indeed very small, not even 1/3 of Chen Tao's big hand. Betty looked at Chen Tao playing with her little hand and said, "Of course it's small, my body is small, so my hands are small too." Chen Tao closed his big hand and wrapped her little hand in his palm. He looked at Betty and said, unknowingly, "It's been a year." Betty was slightly startled. She raised her face and looked at Chen Tao, her eyes shining with a hint of light. "So fast." Chen Tao smiled, "Yeah." Betty retracted her gaze and looked at her little hand held by Chen Tao's big hand with a red face. She said, "It's been a year so fast, really, you have been bullying people all this year, what a waste of time." Chen Tao smiled and said, "Waste? I don't think it's a waste at all. Look at this year, you have learned a lot." Betty's face became even redder. She turned around, raised her pink fist, and hit Chen Tao's chest hard. Seeing Betty's reaction, Chen Tao was happy and hugged her to stop her from hitting people. Betty blushed and said, "Pervert, I was right about you. You are a pervert." Chen Tao smiled and said, "Pervert or not, I have enjoyed this year." Betty snorted, and her baby face turned red. Time resumed. Chen Tao kissed her forehead and said, "You are such a good baby." Betty was so easy to coax. She looked fierce and arrogant. But in fact, as long as a piece of steak and a kiss, she would basically be obedient. If you insist a little, she will do whatever you ask her to do. Even if she was very resistant to something, she couldn't resist Chen Tao's soft and hard coaxing. Looking back on this year, it was really interesting to be with Betty. Betty puffed up her face and was very angry. Looking at Betty's puffed face, Chen Tao was happy, and didn't say anything, quietly accompanying her. The two of them were a little tender. "Tao." A familiar voice sounded from his head with a sense of intimacy. This was Valia's voice. But Valia's voice was a little solemn at this moment. Chen Tao said, "What's wrong?" Valia said, "Where are you now?" Chen Tao looked at Betty in his arms and said, "Earth." "Did you make that thing?" Valia said in a low voice. "That thing?" Chen Tao vaguely knew what Valia was talking about, but he was not sure, so he said, "What is it?" Valia said, "If you are on Earth, look up at the sky." Chen Tao said, "Well, okay." He looked at Betty and said softly, Something seems to have happened outside, put on your clothes, and let's go outside to see. When Betty heard it, she raised her face and looked at Chen Tao. What's the matter? Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled and said, put on your clothes first. I don't want my woman to be taken advantage of by others. Betty rolled her eyes at Chen Tao and said, got it? The two got off the bed. Put on your clothes. Chen Tao held Betty's hand and they went out together. According to Valia's instructions, Chen Tao looked up at the sky. It came into view. Chen Tao's pupils condensed slightly. What is this? In the blue sky above, you can see a terrifying huge black object, crossing the entire sky. The black giant object is emitting a little blue halo, and it looks like a high-tech metal machine. It just covers the earth, very huge. You can see with the naked eye that this giant object is not located in the earth, but outside the earth, because it reflects light, so you can see its shadow. It is very huge, sliding across the southern horizon and then disappearing from the northern horizon. It's very scary. Is this your galaxy celestial defense system? Betty recognized the identity of this thing at a glance, and she looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao exhaled. Xingyun, is that the galaxy defense system you wrote? He asked. Although Chen Tao was almost certain, he still had to confirm it. Yes, Xingyun's mechanical voice came. It was indeed. Chen Tao raised his head and looked at the shocking vision of heaven and earth above. He had never thought about the impact of the galaxy defense system on the Earth after it was built. Unexpectedly, after it was built, looking at the composition of the system on the Earth, it would be so shocking. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 249. Did you see it? Valia's voice sounded in Chen Tao's ears. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao said, I saw it. Valia said, just now this thing suddenly appeared in the universe, it looks like a very powerful defense project. Well, I made it, Chen Tao explained. Hearing this, Valia was slightly startled and said, did you make this? Such a vast celestial project cannot be done without several years. You are. Chen Tao said, you guessed it right. I stayed in the inner world for a year just to write this thing. 1 year, what is the use of this thing that took you a year? Valia's voice came slowly. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao said, it belongs to the Solar System Security Project, a security system that can protect the entire solar system, and it can withstand all attacks from the outer universe. Indeed, your star system is too fragile without defense. If people from the outer universe want to destroy your mother star, they can do it easily. Your star system defense project can indeed effectively protect your star system. Valia agreed with Chen Tao's approach. Chen Tao smiled and said, then, I need to do something else next. You want to invade the fifth universe? Valia's voice came. Chen Tao was not surprised at all when he heard Valia's words. He was used to it. Valia's sharp ability that seemed to be able to see through everything seemed to make people's thoughts invisible. In front of her, few people can have their own secrets. Chen Tao said, well, if you want to go to the fifth universe, you have considered the problem of your home planet, but have you considered the problem of our universe? Valia said lightly. Hearing this, Chen Tao was slightly startled. Valia said, if you don't want to come back from the fifth universe and see your own universe full of dragon corpses, I think you still need to deal with our side. Chen Tao condensed. He frowned. Chen Tao understood Valia's reminder. At present, the invasion of the outer universe continues. If Chen Tao really went to the fifth universe, and if someone from other universes invaded our universe, without Chen Tao as a support, the threat that this universe would face would be extremely huge. At present, If a fifth-generation gene body with a celestial computer came from the outer universe, the only one who could confront it head-on would be Valia, who had the celestial computer written by Nebula. Even if Katie and Baiyao had the fifth-generation gene body, the performance of the celestial computer behind them was too poor, and they would not be opponents facing the enemies from the outer universe head-on. The threat was too great. Chen Tao frowned. Yes, although Chen Tao was reluctant to admit it, Valia's reminder was normal. Chen Tao's previous decision was simply a matter of taking care of the beginning and not the end. We must find a way to protect the entire universe. But how to do it? Your nebula has the ability to analyze any substance, and it also has the ability to write super-concept props. I want to combine these two methods. Valia said. Hearing this, Chen Tao's heart condensed slightly, and he said, "You mean?" Valia said, "Write a prop that can analyze everything. In this way, we can analyze the fifth-generation gene body without relying on the nebula and deal a heavy blow to the opponent. Also, our main threat at present is the inner world ability brought by the opponent's celestial computer. Simply put, it is the opponent's analysis ability. Although the armor you gave us has the ability to be immune to all physical and mental attacks, it cannot avoid being analyzed. So," Valia said, "I want you to write 10 million sets of armor that can be immune to all physical and mental attacks, and can also be immune to the ability to be analyzed." Hearing this, Chen Tao felt his eyes light up. He immediately remembered the artificial man from the outer universe that he had met before. In the past, Chen Tao couldn't figure out why the artificial man could be immune to being analyzed, but now Chen Tao understood. It is very likely that the artificial man has similar super-concept equipment that can be immune to being analyzed. Valia's words made Chen Tao suddenly realize. Indeed, what Chen Tao has been worried about is that the female dragons will be analyzed, right? But if the super-concept equipment is redefined to make it immune to it, then wouldn't it be solved? Chen Tao said, "Call back all the female dragons on the front line, and prepare a warehouse for me." Okay, Valia responded briefly. Chen Tao looked at Betty beside him. Betty looked at Chen Tao with her big eyes, and their eyes met. Chen Tao's eyes fell on Betty's clothes. Chen Tao is now wearing a Lolita-style outfit. Her waist is bound by a pink strip of cloth, which is very slender. The fabric fits her petite body and looks very cute. Under the skirt, her slender legs are wrapped in white stockings, and she is wearing a pair of pink leather shoes. Her long red hair is tied up, and below is a delicate and perfect baby face. Under the narrow eyelashes, there is a pair of big ruby eyes, and her big eyes are looking at Chen Tao. Her skin is as white as cream, her figure is petite and slim, and she is very cute. This outfit was naturally prepared by Chen Tao for Betty. After all, Betty didn't know what kind of clothes would suit her body shape. Now look at Betty, the pink Lolita dress, matched with her fair skin and petite figure, is simply impeccable. She is like a princess from a fairy tale, so beautiful that she seems to be out of this world. Chen Tao smiled and said, "I will program your outfit." Betty was slightly startled. Program? Time stopped. Chen Tao's eyes fell on Betty, and Betty's body turned into blue code. Chen Tao said to Xingyun, "Xingyun, redefine Betty's outfit, making it immune to physical attacks, mental attacks, and immune to the analysis of celestial computers." Received the instruction, redefining. Defining. Chen Tao saw that the code on Betty's dress made of blue code began to change. Time passed by. Programming completed. The moment this sentence appeared, Betty's figure left the inner world mode and entered the outer world mode. Seeing this, Chen Tao was slightly startled. He did not cancel Betty's other world mode. Chen Tao understood that it was the clothes on her body that worked. Betty was slightly startled. She looked around, looking at the blue codes around her. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "What are you going to do now? My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 250. Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled, stretched out his hand, and picked up Betty. Ah! Don't hug me, Betty struggled in Chen Tao's arms. She looked at Chen Tao with her big ruby-like eyes and said, I'm not a child. Put me down. Chen Tao smiled and said, no, it's comfortable to hold. Betty is very petite. With Chen Tao's help, she can sit on Chen Tao's elbow and lean on Chen Tao's arm. In this way, she can see Chen Tao with her face turned sideways. Just like this, Betty's face turned red. She felt very embarrassed about being treated like a child. Aha! Suddenly, a pair of red dragon wings unfolded from behind Betty. Betty flapped her wings and flew out of Chen Tao's arms. Seeing this, Chen Tao was slightly startled. He looked at Betty, who was flying above. Betty crossed her chest with her hands, flapped her dragon wings, looked at Chen Tao, and said, I can fly by myself, I don't need you to hold me, hum. There are two small dragon horns on her forehead. Seeing this, Chen Tao smiled. Chen Tao had put away her dragon wings and horns before, but now that she has restored the function of her genes, she can naturally grow them back. No problem. Chen Tao said with a smile, we are going to the dragon civilization next. Are you sure you want to expose your horns and wings? Betty was slightly startled. She pursed her lower lip, flapped her dragon wings, and landed in front of Chen Tao. She raised her face and looked at Chen Tao and said, if you don't show it, you won't show it? You are not allowed to hug me. He's not a child, so it's weird to hold him. Hearing this, Chen Tao showed a wicked smile and said, a few days ago, people kept asking me for a hug. Why is it weird now? Upon hearing this, Betty's face turned red, and she glared at Chen Tao fiercely. Big bad guy, she turned sideways, with her back to Chen Tao, the dragon wings on her back disappeared, and her pair of dragon horns also disappeared. Fortunately, Betty's back was a cardigan, otherwise the dragon wings would have split again as soon as they came out. Seeing that Betty was sulking, Chen Tao smiled and said, okay, if you don't want to hug me, then, give me your hand. Chen Tao stretched out his hand to Betty. Betty was slightly startled. She looked at the big hand stretched out by Chen Tao. Her eyes glowed, and she raised her little hand and placed it in the palm of Chen Tao's big hand. Chen Tao's big hands closed slightly and held Betty's small hand in his palm. Feeling the heat from Chen Tao's big hand, Betty's fair baby face had a blush, and there was joy in her eyes. She didn't reject the feeling of being held hands. To be precise, not only did she not reject it, she actually liked it. Noticing the change in Betty's face, Chen Tao smiled and said, your hands are so small. This is what he feels. Betty's hand is indeed very small, so small that if you hold it gently, it can be completely wrapped in the palm of your hand. Betty's face turned slightly red and she said, it's up to you. Chen Tao smiled, let's go, Dragon Man Hall, are you ready? Well. Betty said. The two disappeared from the same place, and when they reappeared, they appeared in the Dragon Man's Hall. In the Dragon Man's Hall, Wei Lia was sitting on a chair on the high platform. Seeing Chen Tao and Betty coming over, Wei Lia said, that's it? Okay. Chen Tao stood next to Wei Lia, on this high platform, and he looked forward. You can see groups of dragon warriors below and above. At a glance, you can barely see the edges. This mobility is a bit strong, I guess they all came from a micro wormhole. Wei Lia said, I used the celestial computer you gave me to program a locator and teleporter for them, so that they can teleport to the Dragon Man's palace anytime and anywhere, and at the same time, they can also return to their original place through the locator. Place. Chen Tao nodded slightly. She really has some ideas. In that case, let's get started. Chen Tao took a step forward and looked at all the female dragons on the field. As soon as the female dragon warriors saw Chen Tao, the warriors on the ground knelt down on one knee. King. There were so many people that the sound was deafening. Chen Tao said, "Get up." Yes. Wow, they stood up at the same time. The sound of armor rubbing against each other is particularly pleasant. Chen Tao said, "I called you here today because I plan to improve the strength of the super concept equipment for you. Before the previous battles, I discovered that this armor has shortcomings. They can be brought into the other world, and then it is analyzed by the computer, so it takes a lot of time, but the time in the other world does not count. If the armor is analyzed, you will die. Therefore, I plan to upgrade your super concept armor so that they have the ability not to be analyzed." With that said, Chen Tao said, "I'm starting now." After telling them, Chen Tao raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Crack. Chen Tao crossed his arms and said, "That's enough. You can go about your own business later." Yes, the female dragon warriors responded one after another. Then they disappeared into the hall one by one. Chen Tao turned back to look at Wei Lia beside him. Wei Lia crossed her legs and looked directly at Chen Tao. When Chen Tao looked at him, Wei Lia couldn't help but smile. She said, "Every time I watch it, it feels incredible. This is the ability of the other world. For you, a long time has passed, but for me, it is just a moment. So, how long have you just spent in the other world?" Chen Tao said, "It's not too long, 4 hours. Although there are tens of millions of female dragons, using Nebula's group writing ability, this time is not long." Villia nodded slightly. She stood up, raised her hand, opened the micro wormhole, and said, "You have to go to Katie and Bai Yao and help them program their armor. Before that, let me take you to the warehouse first." With that said, Wei Lia entered the warehouse. When Chen Tao saw this scene, he reached out to Betty. Betty blushed slightly and raised her hand. This time she did not put it into Chen Tao's palm, but held Chen Tao's 2 fingers. Her little hands were so small that she could only hold Chen Tao's 2 fingers. Chen Tao took Betty through the micro wormhole. "In front of you is a warehouse." Wei Lia crossed his chest with his hands, leaned against the wall, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "This warehouse is located on the Dragon-5 satellite and is guarded by dedicated personnel. However, this warehouse is a bit big. Although the more weapons, the better, I think at present even the entire universe doesn't need too many super concept weapons." Wei Lia looked at Chen Tao and said, "So, I think it's enough if you can make 100 of them. The size should be as small as possible and easy to carry." Here we also used our own celestial computer to create a super concept weapon that can analyze low-level genes. As he spoke, Villia raised his hand and threw it away. Chen Tao stretched out his hand, took it, and looked at it. It was an object the size of a marble, completely black.